What will the economy hold for supply chains in 2025? And what will happen with the labor pool this year? And retailers rethink returns. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories as well as news and supply chain trends as this week we begin the 6th season of the Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner Premium Services, your partner for high-value freight. With decades of experience, Werner delivers on time, every time. Specialized solutions, dedicated driver teams, and unmatched expertise. Delivering beyond expectations. Become a customer today. Go to werner.com to learn more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, as we begin a new year, we all wonder what will the economy hold for supply chains. I recently spoke with one of the most respected economists in the world, Jason Schenker. He's the CEO of Prestige Economics, and we discussed a wide range of topics, including the economic outlook for supply chains and material handling, inflation, consumer prices, interest rates, and looming tariffs. Here now is our discussion. Thank you, Jason, for coming back and being with us again on Logistics Matters. It's great to have you again.
Happy to be here, Dave.
You were with us about a year ago at this time, sharing your insights for 2024, and I have to say that your projections were pretty much spot on.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you to say. I had expected we would see payrolls slow, but still be positive. The unemployment rate rise. We actually saw both of those things. Payroll slowed. Unemployment rate actually went up because there were more people looking for work than payrolls were being added. We also expected modestly positive GDP, slowly easing inflation rates, and a move towards interest rate cuts. And, we've seen all of those things. And it was, a year that was, in the end, a pretty good year for the economy. GDP looked pretty solid. Jobs gains still continuing, although slowed. Unemployment rate going up, but still low. So it was still a really positive year. And of course, our biggest concerns going into 2024 were around the political and the geopolitical. And so a swift and decisive end of that US presidential election, really important for reducing the risk of economic uncertainty and political violence, just because we knew so fast who won, which leaves really just one last thing that we were really concerned going into 2024 with, which was the geopolitical risk. And those risks remain something that is also likely to hang over the 2025 outlook.
Well, as you mentioned, the U.S. economy is in fairly good shape, even though many people may not be feeling that or may not have been told that during the election cycle. But as we begin 2025, you look back at what took place in 2024, what do you think the outlook for the new year will be economically?
Yeah, I think we're going to see probably a modest pace of GDP, could slow a little bit further from what we've seen this year in the United States. I think we're going to see interest rates go down, inflation rates probably ease, although I think in the next a little bit here we could see the inflation rate pop up. But by sometime in the second quarter, the year-on-year inflation rates are likely to be quite a bit lower. We expect a couple of things that's really tied to base effects. So while some of the data for the very end of 2024 and early 2025 could look more elevated than it had just a few months prior for year-on-year inflation rates, by the end of the second quarter, inflation rates are likely to be quite a bit lower, again, due to base effects. So we do see year-on-year inflation rates easing. We see interest rates easing. We see growth likely slowing a bit further. So, it's not a horrible outlook because as interest rates go down, we're also likely to see, hopefully, a pop in business investment, manufacturing activity, and material handling spending.
Yeah, and of course, the big gorilla in the room as we're talking here in December is the proposed tariffs, which may affect supply chains. Of course, we've heard of China, Mexico, Canada as possibly being targets for tariffs. Is this just a negotiating tactic, or are those really serious proposals by the incoming administration?
I think there's a couple things. One, and I think, one of the The graduate degrees I did was in negotiation and conflict resolution. And when we talk about things like this, we're thinking about kind of conflict systems. And President Trump is trying to position himself as a distributive negotiator, which means there is going to be a push for a winner take all kind of model. Now, in reality, that's not what's likely to happen, right? But strong posturing may be enough to get some of the change that he's looking for. And the reserve position, in other words, what he actually really, really wants, may not be and is very unlikely to be blanketed tariffs on all Canadian and all Mexican goods. I think it's really going to be a focus on attacking the transshipments of goods that are coming from China through Mexico in order to circumvent US tariffs. I think that's a top priority. And obviously, addressing things like the border crisis and fentanyl imports, those are key things. So, those are the interests behind the position, right? In any kind of conflict, you have a position, and the position is lots of tariffs on everything, right? But what's the real interest there? The interest is the border crisis, the fentanyl, the transshipments. So if you start off a bit blustery and people are unsure of how things are going to go, they may actually be more willing to cut a deal because they're really concerned about the uncertainty of how things may play out, right? If you don't know how it's going to go, you may be more willing to collaborate to get to a deal. And I think that's what we're really seeing from the incoming administration is this posturing in order to, maybe get action pretty quickly. But I think many administrations and many politicians say many things, and they often do very different things from what they pledge or what they promise, what they threaten. But what we do know is that in President Trump's first administration, we know that that kind of very firm push, that kind of distributive threat, that kind of distributive posturing, got results. And I think that's what he's looking for here. Not and I think there's going to be flexibility as long as the outcome is what he's looking for.
So, how should supply chain professionals prepare for this? We know a lot of inventory has been brought in the last part of this year in anticipation of possible tariffs. Should companies rethink their supply chains and the amount of inventory that they carry overall?
Well, there's a couple things I'd say to this. And the first is if we look at the MHIBAI by Prestige Economics, which is a monthly economic indicator produced by Prestige Economics in conjunction with MHI, it shows that inventories have actually fallen a lot in the last couple of years. So even though we're hearing and we see the values of inventories going up, especially in some of the government data, what we actually see in survey data from leading executives in the supply chain is that they've been running down their WIP inventory and running down their backlog to get shipments out the door, right? So, in terms of how should the industry be thinking about it, I think there are a few maybe more immutable expectations. And one is that the US and China very much seem to be on a collision course. And regardless of huff and puff and bluster around tariffs related to a whole host of countries, whether that's Canada, Mexico, our European, Asian, or other global allies and key trade partners, the situation with China is very different. And I think that's where the hammer is likely to swing the most. And I would contend that being exposed in your supply chain to China is going to be risky business going forward because of that high potential for a kinetic conflict at some point in the near to medium term with China over Taiwan. Trades are going to become more difficult over time, that we're going to more further decouple our supply chains from China for dual use tech, for high tech, for industrial goods, any of that stuff, because a second Trump administration is likely to prioritize building up a domestic manufacturing base and tonnage.
The polls after the election revealed that a lot of Americans sort of voted with their wallet. They felt the prices were too high, and that's one reason why they voted the way they did. Do you think the prices will drop under the new administration, as many hope?
Nope. So here's the thing, there's the price and there's inflation. If you're expecting prices to go down, that's deflation. That almost never happens. By the way, no one wants that. Deflation is actually worse than inflation. So let me lay it out. In the Q3 2024 US GDP report, 69% of US GDP was consumption, people buying stuff. Well, it's really good news because our economy has a lot of jobs and wages are at record highs. The stock market's near record highs, home prices are near record highs. So everybody's out there spending, which is great because that's 69% of GDP. With inflation, the dollars you have today are worth less in the future, which means you're actually like a little bit incentivized to spend now. Now, you don't want rampant inflation, but a little inflation's okay because it incentivizes you to spend now and not hoard your money because you're like, well, if I just sit on this giant pile of cash, if I just stuff my mattress full of cash and sit on it for 20 years, well, the money in the mattress is going to be worth a lot less than it is now. So I certainly don't want to do that. And you don't want rampant inflation because that makes it very difficult for businesses to plan. And there are massive social impacts. That's what happened in 2024, right? Groceries prices go through the roof, right? But now let's flip it on its head. Let's say prices all go down. All right. Well, if you have dollars and you now know that you're going to be able to buy more stuff with your dollars in the future, what do you want to do? Well, you don't want to spend now because now they're worth more tomorrow. You want to hoard your dollars. Okay, that's really bad if 69% of your GDP is people buying stuff because now no one's going to buy stuff. They're going to hoard their dollars in a deflationary environment, and then you get a massive contraction in GDP. You don't want any of that. Now, that's prices. That's absolute prices. Now, do I think inflation rates are going to go down? Yeah. And so here's the rub. This is where the American public, I think, has had some real challenges. And the communication issue was an issue going into the election. Because while prices are still going up, they're going up at a slower pace. You're telling the American public inflation's going down. What the public hears is inflation's going down. Wait a minute, my grocery bill is still really high and it's still creeping up. Prices aren't going down. They feel they're being lied to. This has a lot to do with the fact that math is hard. And the reality is that second derivative issues are complicated enough to explain to anyone, let alone the general public. I mean, the American public, half of Americans read at or below the eighth grade level. And now you need to explain calculus to them for them to understand the difference between prices and inflation. So are prices going to drop? I don't think so. I don't think prices of almost anything are going to drop. We just want the prices to stop going up at a crazy pace. And I think that is going to happen.
Right, that makes sense. Now, of course, your focus with our industry is on material handling and supply chains. You work with MHI on a regular
Yep.
basis. What do you think the prospects for supply chains and the material handling industry in particular will be for 2025?
I think the outlook for 2025 is pretty good for supply chain, for material handling manufacturers. Interest rates go down. That's going to incentivize people to spend. Seems very likely that we'll get the Trump tax cuts to probably become permanent. Again, low sustained corporate tax rates plus falling interest rates. Plus, still record high equity markets, record high home prices. All that stuff's really good for spending. So I think right now, material handling has been burning off a backlog for the last 2 years, as have, by the way, almost all manufacturers, something reflected in the ISM Manufacturing Index. But now I think as interest rates go down, there's a chance you're going to get a pop in new orders. And then with a low tax rate, you've got all the incentive in the world to spend, right? all those things are really positive for growth. So I am optimistic about 2025 and also 2026. I think there is uh, probably a good year ahead of us.
Well, that would be welcome. I know that it's been sluggish the last couple of years as people have held on to their cash, kind of taking a wait and see attitude. So hopefully we're beyond that and people are ready to spend again.
Well, that's right. And a lot of businesses, they respond to these incentives, right? This is why the Fed raises interest rates. They wanted to cool demand. Well, demand was so hot that, you had folks out there spending like crazy. And when there's more demand than supply, prices rise. So raising the interest rates dampens demand. You dampen demand, the prices ease off. So this is kind of how the Fed manages inflation with interest rates. But now, hopefully, as inflation falls and interest rates fall too, you're going to get more activity on the business investment side. So that's pretty exciting.
Do you see any particular areas for investment in supply chains that you think companies will be looking to do this year?
I think there are a number of different areas. So e-commerce is probably going to hit new record levels this year. I think that as a percent of all commerce, e-commerce retailers may even see the percentage hit a new record high. And the record high percent of e-commerce as a percent of the total retail in the country hit a record of 16.4% in the second quarter of 2020. So during the worst part of COVID, 16.4% of all retail was e-commerce. I think in 2025, in one of the quarters this year, we may surpass that percentage and hit a new record percent of e-commerce. So that's good news for material handling and supply chain, that's for sure. I also see the labor market remaining bifurcated. Knowledge work jobs may still be a struggle to obtain, but the employers looking to fill physically demanding in-person jobs, they're still going to struggle. And that includes jobs in warehousing, transportation, wholesale, manufacturing, right? That includes supply chain, right? That includes material handling, which means there's probably going to also be record levels of demand for automation throughout supply chain, material handling, warehousing, right? So all of those things are probably going to be pretty good opportunities for material handling in the year ahead.
Let's hope so. Jason, thank you very much for being with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Dave. Again, I appreciate being on here. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the year ahead, but the one caveat I do want to leave the listeners with is to just be wary of those geopolitical and supply chain risks that extend globally, because I think that's really the only thing in my mind that could otherwise spoil a pretty big party in 2025.
I think you're very much right in that. We've been talking with Jason Schenker. He's the CEO of Prestige Economics. Thank you again, Jason.
Thank you, Dave.
Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, you wrote about how current trends may shed some light on the labor outlook for 2025. Can you share the details?
Yeah, I'm glad to, Dave. That Happy New Year, by the way, for our first show back. So labor, of course, is one of the top themes that we've been covering in the past year. It just seems to apply everywhere in the sector, whether it's finding enough qualified employees for increasingly technical positions, or simply enough head count to fill all the open spaces needed for warehouse work or truck driving. And so this week I wrote about a report that identified 5 workplace trends that are expected to come up in the new year, and also some broad methods for how employers can best adapt to those. And that came from a Dutch human resources consulting firm called Top Employers Institute, who had surveyed more than 2,000 employers globally each of the last couple years for this study. And the broad takeaway here was that they're advising companies to adopt an approach that they call systems thinking. It's a simple concept that all the different parts of a system, whether it's an organization or even a society, are connected and they influence each other, and nothing happens in a vacuum. So to accomplish the goals, employers increasingly need to blend workers' personal empowerment goals, blend that with the collective company goals.
Well, Ben, that makes sense, I guess, in theory, but did they give any specific examples of how it may apply?
Uh, Great question, because this sounds like one of those ideas that sounds more easily said than done. But they did run through how it might apply. I had mentioned the 5 workplace trends that they expect to see in 2025. So first, the labor pool itself is changing due to demographic shifts, such as declining birth rates around the world and an aging population around the world. And that's part of what's causing some of the labor shortages that we see. So the report said that companies can actually make some changes to have a more sustainable workforce, that's sustainable in the sense of retaining the workers that you have. For example, they can offer more family-friendly work arrangements, and that's needed to acknowledge the new reality that many more people are now responsible for both their aging relatives as well as their young children. The second theme is that, unlike previous generations, today's employees tend to change jobs and careers with greater fluidity. So employees no longer necessarily expect to build lasting relationships solely within a single organization, but rather in communities that stretch across various jobs. But companies can actually gain benefits from that if they encourage workers to share the fresh ideas and innovations that they might have even learned in other places. A third theme is blurring of those traditional categories that we all know of white collar jobs like clerical, administrative, managerial, and blue collar jobs, which are typically like in agriculture and manufacturing and construction. And so we're seeing higher demand in many places now for skilled trades and manual labor. So more demand for sort of a merging of the blue collar and the white collar coupled with a growing emphasis for needed skills, like maybe new technologies, instead of formal qualifications, like degrees. Fourth trend, organizations are increasingly seeing the advantages of including neurodivergent workers in the workplace. That might include people with autism or dyslexia, ADHD, different things, and they can bring unique perspectives and capabilities to the workplace. And finally, how to find, of course, we can't have a conversation nowadays without talking about AI. So how to find the balance between the analytical power of artificial intelligence and that human intuition that we all have. That the report said that, if 2024 marked AI's disruption of highly skilled roles like software development or healthcare, then 2025 will be the year that AI sort of moves into the higher levels of leadership and becomes a tool in the C-suite in terms of making strategic decisions. So a whole lot to think about there, but some of those points really rang true anecdotally for what a lot of us see around us. So seems like some good points to keep in mind.
Yeah, it certainly does. And it's always good, I think, as we start a new year, to hope for some good things to come and applying some of those principles.
It's never a dull moment. We'll keep reporting on it.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, as we now are in the first week of January, it truly is the season of retail returns. And you've written in the January issue of DC Velocity that many retailers are rethinking how they may manage their reverse logistics operations. Can you share some more?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So you're right. Peak shipping season's behind us, and then we're moving on to peak returns. We're in the thick of it as retailers and e-commerce fulfillment companies deal with all those post-holiday returns. And interestingly, we're approaching National Returns Day, which is marked on the first Monday after New Year's each year. I wasn't aware or I didn't remember that special day, but there you have it. I guess we'll all celebrate in a few days. And as you say, Dave, at DC Velocity, we always write about the state of reverse logistics in our January issue. And you're right, I had the pleasure of tackling the topic this year. And it's a big one. More than $700 billion worth of merchandise was returned in 2023, for example. We're still awaiting the 2024 numbers. And that's according to the National Retail Federation. So I spoke to a few experts about the returns trends that are shaping the market as we start 2025.
So, what's the latest? How are logistics companies planning to deal with this year's flood of returned merchandise?
Well, thanks to a growing focus on reverse logistics, sort of industry wide, more logistics professionals are applying both strategy and technology to manage the complexity of the returns landscape. And those strategies include giving retail workers a stronger role in reverse logistics. And just to give a quick example, some organizations are engaging their frontline retail workers earlier in the return cycle to help streamline the overall process. That could include developing pre-sorting strategies to guide the returns journey. And what that means is, rather than simply tossing items into a bin and sending them back to the warehouse, where pick, pack, and ship associates have to then figure it out, retail workers are designating whether an item can be returned to the shelves or they need to go back for further processing. We're also seeing more companies implement things like returns management software platforms, which also direct and guide the returns process. And on top of that, more companies are adopting handheld devices in the store that can also speed returns by giving associates easy access to data, allowing them to communicate in real time with instant messages and alerts, things like that. I think we've all been in the store and I've had people just handle the return, practically right when I walk in. They don't need to go to a terminal and do all of that. So it sort of speeds things. There's also a lot of new technology being used in the warehouse to speed the returns process. And our listeners can learn more about all of this by checking out our January issue online and in print.
Well, any tools that are available to help with some of that messy aspect of returns is welcome. So we look forward to seeing your article.
Yep, there's a lot out there, a lot to dig into.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Jason Schenker of Prestige Economics for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner Premium Services, your partner for high-value freight. With decades of experience, Werner delivers on time, every time. Specialized solutions, dedicated driver teams, and unmatched expertise, delivering beyond expectations. Become a customer today. Go to werner.com to learn more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week and a very happy new year.